I have a little bit different story getting into real estate. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. I moved to Utah just a couple years ago. And so a lot of my journey has to do with creative finance, but I'm going to start from the beginning. I'm going to talk to you guys about how I started in real estate. I started in tech sales and then migrated my way to real estate. Lots of fails in between that I'll get into. And then I'll also talk about finding my niche. It wasn't from the very beginning that I decided creative finance was my angle. It took a lot of, again, L's and taking action in different avenues before I found creative finance and it working for my personality, which is another huge spot that I'll talk about. And also being a realtor, right? So I call myself an active investor agent that specializes in the creative finance world. And then I'm going to dive into how I'm finding these cash flowing deals in Utah. The most important thing, which I'll dive into, going to these events is cool. Going to the events is fun. It gets you motivated. It makes you feel like you're doing something. But at the end of the day, guys, if you're not taking action afterwards, this means absolutely nothing. The first year of my learning journey, I was going to all these events. It felt good. It felt like you're hanging out with friends, but I wasn't doing anything afterwards. And that's like the worst place that you can be in, the analysis paralysis. So I encourage you all, don't let this be the end. Make sure you have actionable items afterwards that you're taking part in. Okay, and then we'll turn it over to the Q&A side and we'll go from there. I want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you guys have any questions in the meantime, raise your hand and we'll dive through the questions. So we'll dive right into it. Okay, when I talk about my career, the first thing I think of is getting married to my wife. This was 5 years ago as of last week. So I've been married for 5 years to the love of my life, Morgan. She's absolutely the best. The reason I bring this up as the first step in my career is because before getting married, I had no aspirations, right? Like it was just me, myself, and I. If I was at home playing video games all day, nothing would change until I got married and started thinking about building a family. That's when my wheels started turning. What am I going to do to provide for my family and to create the life that I want? And so that's the first step of my career, is getting married to my wife. Now our first kiddo is due in like 3 weeks. So lots changing. But okay. So a little bit about my journey. Right out of college, I jumped into tech sales. Before tech sales, I wanted to be a dentist because one, I could make a lot of money, and two, have the freedom. And after talking to the person who I thought that's why I wanted to do it, the person, it was a family friend who was a dentist. He was rich as hell and it looked amazing. He had a cabin that we would go to. Life was good. I was like, I want to do that. And then I talked to him when I was in college and he said, don't do it. The atmosphere, it's not fun. People don't love going to the dentist. They're in pain. It's not a happy environment. So I decided, okay, now I need to find a career that will make me a lot of money and give me the time and freedom. And so that's where sales and real estate started stirring in my mind. So when I jumped into tech sales, I was always doing real estate simultaneously. What that looked like was mostly wholesale. I was finding deals for other investors, selling them off while still having my 9 to 5 in the tech world. Back in 2021, so 3 years ago, I was so passionate about real estate that I left tech and thought I was going to be this wholesale guru. Left the job, started spending $6,000 or $7,000 a month on my marketing, and I failed miserably. Right? Like I thought I was going to have this wholesale operation, be speaking on these big stages, life would be good. Fell flat on my face. The reason being, yeah, it's not easy. It's simple, but not easy. That's what I'll say. I still wholesale to this day, but the whole operation of having a wholesale team and having a high marketing spend is not my personality. The main reason is because when you have an operation, you have high overhead. $6,000 or $7,000 in marketing spend I didn't have the appetite to take on deals, to buy them for myself, because I felt like I needed to pay the bills. I felt like I needed to pay my people. And so I was never in buy mode. I was in survival mode. So I realized that wasn't my thing. I jumped back into tech to figure out my life. And about 6 months later, my wife decided that she couldn't live in Seattle anymore. So I kind of skipped that. I'm from Seattle. I just migrated there somehow. But no, I'm born and raised in Seattle, and I thought I was gonna live there my entire life. But my wife was like, nope, not raising a family here. It's gloomy, it's gray. I don't wanna be here. So push came to shove. I decided that my personality, I'm an extrovert. I can get along and meet people in new places. So I was like, okay, I'll make the sacrifice. Let's move to Utah. Now, keep in mind, I was doing real estate back in Seattle. If you've seen Thatch Nguyen on Instagram, he's 1 million+ followers. He's everywhere. He is my personal mentor, my first mentor that I'm calling, I'm texting, trying to figure out this industry. I did not want to lose that relationship. So moving to Utah was a big deal for me. I felt like I had it made with my network out there. So it was a big sacrifice, but you'll see why I don't regret it. And I've learned to love Utah. So, okay, I want to start also in my career. Back to the real estate's not easy. It's not all sunshines and rainbows. Dating back to 2021, I'm going to go through my losses very briefly, just to show you guys this is not an overnight success, right? So back in 2021, my first flip where I made a good check, I got a fat chunk of money that I've never seen in my entire life. And I thought I was going to invest my way to retiring at a young age. Again, being on stages, that pride in me, I thought I was good. I had made it. Life was good. Keep in mind, this is COVID, right? So everyone was making money in real estate. So my little naive brain thought that I was some cool investor, made my first check, and then my investment strategy afterwards was not great, right? So I put $40,000 into an FBA scam. Don't ever do that. Don't pay for these Amazon stores, please, guys. I lost 40 grand there. The next year, another big flip sold, and I lost 25,000 because I didn't send in a commission document. I had my license, but I was not a realtor at all. I thought it was easy. So I didn't send in a CDA. Title company was confused, lost 25 grand. Tried to sue them, never got it. Anyways, long story. I could dive into all these for hours afterwards if you guys want to, but I lost 40,000 on a flip in Washington. And then the most recent one that's been on Bigger Pockets. I spoke on Bigger Pockets, David Green's podcast, speaking about this $180,000 loss on a sub 2 deal. So yeah, I could go on about that one specifically too. Yeah, so in today's presentation, we're going to be talking about creative finance in general. The creative finance umbrella has two most popular strategies in today's market. We could go into it a lot further, but number one is sub 2. Number 2 is true seller finance. Sub 2 is when you take over a loan, and seller finance is when it's owned outright. So that's the two different things. And I prefer seller finance, which that might have something to do with it. So then in 2024, just like last month, I lost $15,000 on a flip. So as you can see, I'm really, really good at losing money. I'm trying to get better at that, but this is my track record in the last like 5 years, right? So now moving on, this is a major part of when I talk about myself, because I don't want to come on stage and act like everything's easy, that I have everything figured out. I have losses from the beginning of my career, and I have losses as of a month ago, right? It doesn't end. Now I'll just highlight some quick wins from my career to show that it's not all gloom. In 2 flips combined, I made $620,000 just from those 2. Thank you. So this is in Seattle, yeah. So those paid for the losses, luckily. And in this process, I've acquired 13 units. It's not just the units I honestly hate the unit count. People use it as a marketing scandal, but you could have 13,000 mobile home parks, right? And units don't really matter. I buy properties in appreciating areas on purpose. So my units, I'm very, very cognizant of where they are located and a lot of other metrics. Someone could have 60 units in Ohio, and I would guarantee mine would outperform them. So I don't love the unit count for that reason. But and then in the last 21 months here in Utah, as I've coined myself an investor agent, I've done 33 million in volume with no database in Utah. So that's one of my claim to fames of my wins. And I'll get into as well how I've earned that or how I've got to that point. And a lot of it has to do with the network side. So, okay. And then more Utah specific, since moving here almost 2 years ago, that's all 33 million in that volume sold on the agent, off market and on market, and then 7 units acquired. So half my rental portfolio was done in the last 2 years. Now, I've probably acquired like 18 properties. I've sold some, and out of these 7 units, I've kept 5 because that sub 2 deal that I lost that property. So out of the 7 that I've acquired, I've kept 5. So watch out for that marketing right there. I only have 5 in Utah. Okay. How do I find these cash flowing deals in Utah? Now, I know this is probably the main reason you guys are here. And I think this is where I can really help people specifically is how I find these deals. And I will preface, finding deals is not easy. So you're not gonna hear some magic nugget today that's gonna help you find a deal tomorrow. You're gonna have to apply these action steps time and time again until you get much better at it. And then it's much better from there. For example, like it used to take me 15 hours of finding or 40 hours of finding to find one deal. And luckily, since I've practiced and I've gotten much better, my time spent per deal is much, much better, right? So that's what you have to look forward to as you put in the effort. Okay, so those 3 steps. Understanding what a deal is. If you don't know what you're looking for, you're never gonna find it. If you're shopping for a car and you don't know what brand you're looking for, you're gonna be shopping for 10 years, right? Number 2, create your lead funnel. Number 3, make tons of offers. And I'll also chime in on how I'm making these offers specifically. I've talked a lot. Do you guys have any questions up until this point? No questions yet? Of course.
When you were determining like your buy box, was it okay, so you sit down for 8 hours? Like, what was your process of like, kind of getting to how specific you are about it?
That's a really good question. So I think it's partly time, like seeing what's happened to my portfolio and seeing what's happened to my portfolio with time. That's one part of it, and I'll get into that. The other part is being surrounded around mentors that have been doing this for 55 plus years, right? Like one of my mentors in Seattle, who I learned creative finance from, I'm happy to give him your name, Greg Pinio. He's 70-something years old. Every mentor that I've learned from that's been doing this for 20 plus years talks about location, location, location. You'll hear that like reiterated in the investment world, location, location, location. Now it's hard to deviate from that when cash flow is another buzzword, especially in today's economy. It's like cash flow, cash flow. Grant Cardone talks about it a lot, right? And cash flow is great. But what I realized when I first started buying properties, I had a cash flow market and I had an appreciation market. This is in Washington. So in Eastern Washington was my cash flow market. And what happened, even though my cash flow was much better in Eastern Washington, what happened to my appreciation portfolio increased my net worth tenfold compared to what Eastern Washington did. So now like that's narrowed down my buy box to buying in good locations and really thinking about resale. So there's some funky houses that might have a better return, but I won't touch them. I don't like condos because I think long term. I want to own these for 10, 15 years. My mentors say condos HOA changes, you have less control over your asset. And so different things like that I've narrowed down through the years. And so I would coin my buy box as something that's owned free and clear, that's single family or small multifamily, that meet certain parameters, especially Utah County. But 8% cash on cash is my parameter on that. So I'm a lot more specific now than I used to be. Good question, Natalia. Okay. So the first part, understanding what a deal is. I would love a raise of hand if you're specific about what your buy box is, raise your hand. I love it. Okay, let's hear, what would you say your buy box is?
If the seller's willing to take a discount or they're willing to accept terms.
Okay.
I don't care where it is. I don't care what kind of property it is.
So it's more not necessarily price box, it's more of a criteria.
It's not about the price, it's about the terms.
Okay. So in my advice, I want this to be interactive. As someone that finds a lot of deals and works with a ton of different buyers, if someone came to me and said, I care about the terms, I don't care where it's at, the hard part is with that buy box is I don't know how to think of you. If I find an amazing deal with a 3% interest only in Highland, I'm going to think of the person that says I buy in North Utah County with this percent down and their buy box is dialed in because I know that they're going to perform when I bring that to them. The amount of buyers that I have, like a long, long list of if it cash flows in Utah, which means terms, right, is hundreds and hundreds of people. It's really, really hard for me to service those people for that reason. So I would encourage you to try and be more specific about that because you'll get a lot more deals to your plate if you are.
I'm usually still selling these.
There we go. Okay, so that's a different perspective. As a buyer, a buy box can be a lot different, right? Cool. Okay, so that's my 2 cents is be very, very, very specific about what you want. If you're a buyer and you want the best deals, you have to be specific. Because I'm not bringing you a deal if I know you're not going to perform on it. And I'm not one of those wholesalers that blast deals. I'll blast them here and there. 90% of my deals on a relationship basis, if I talk to someone, for example, from this group, and someone says, hey, I'm looking for this, 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 I'm going to think of you when that deal comes across my plate. And that's, keep in mind, a lot of this is advice or these tips that I'm preaching about are not me. This is me investing hundreds of thousands, maybe 100,000 flat in education. My goal is 20,000 a year to invest into my own personal education. So I take tidbits from other people. I'm not trying to act like I know everything. I'm just reiterating what I've learned. Okay. Finding the metric that defines a deal for you. That's more on the equation basis. For me, all I see is cash on cash return. As I go further into multifamily, it transitions to a cap rate. So for you guys specifically, I'm going to be talking about cash on cash today because that's my lens. But you guys need to be very, very specific about what that entails for you. Okay. Now also understanding what a deal is. Now this probably more applies for wholesalers. If you are less about buying, more about wholesaling, and you're new and maybe not in a position to buy right now, you should be analyzing hundreds of deals right now. I don't care if they're from a wholesaler. I don't care if it's something that you're negotiating with specifically, but this is a muscle memory thing that you should be practicing today. Because if the right deal comes across your plate and you don't recognize it being a deal, it's going to be tough for you, one, to get that under contract, or two, to execute yourself as a buyer.
I want to try my buy box.
Let's do it. I love it.
So looking for a 3-bed, 2-bath, or a house with 80 potential in Salt Lake County, Davis County, or Beaver County. 5% interest rate or less than 10% down.
Okay, I'll find you that deal. I love it. That's beautiful. That's perfect. Because it doesn't have to be specific. Like you can list three counties and that's fine. Because if that's your specific buy box, I'm not telling you to pick one city, right? As long as you know I will buy this property and you're confident about it, like you just mentioned, and that's huge. You probably learned that from Lame too, didn't you? Okay, so, and then the last thing, talk to major buyers to figure out where they would be. This is something I learned at the beginning. When I didn't have capital to buy properties, I was a wholesaler, right? I put that hat on as a wholesaler. And if you guys are thinking like, I feel so new to this that I don't know where to begin, this is where I would start. I would start by talking to major buyers to figure out what their requirements are on buying. Because if, like I can tell you, I just told you my buy box, right? If you find me a deal that fits my buy box, 8% cash on cash, own free and clear, Utah County, small multifamily, single family with 15% less or down, I'll buy it. And so if you speak with enough players and you can find those deals, you're going to be able to wholesale these deals and make a great living on it. So that's breaking that down a little bit further. Any questions on this slide? Okay. Again, going back to the basics. This is my buy box that I just mentioned to you. Cash on cash return. The definition of cash on cash return is your annual cash flow divided by your total cash invested in the property. So if a property makes $1,000 a month, that's $12,000 in annual income or an annual cash flow. If you divide that by a $100,000 down payment, that's 12% cash on cash return, right? Okay, so now that we've defined cash on cash return, the biggest mistake that I see people making is they have no idea what cash flow is. And this is frustrating when people send me deals and they're like, this is a 15% cash on cash. Why aren't you buying it? You told me you would buy this deal if I brought you it. Here's why. Because they don't know what cash flow actually means. And that's rude. Everyone has their own definition of cash flow. My definition is true cash flow. What could I withdraw from this property and feel confident about it? For me, it means including all of these expenses. And this is crucial. This is my calculator that I use that I created, super simple. I'll send that to you guys for free. Just fill out your information in there. Not selling you anything. But this is really the biggest flaw that I see deal makers do. They bring me deals and they think the cash flow is insane. And then once you start adding in the true expenses, it no longer cash flows.
Can you just go back to the other slide, the annual cash flow, pre-tax?
Yeah.
And then total cash invested.
Yeah, of course. And total cash invested, usually that's down payment plus rehab. And then whatever closing costs, right? And that is included here. You can see that the down payment plus rehab is in that equation. So real estate really is simple. It's a lot of like determination, but it's very, very simple. This calculator, I try and dumb it down as much as possible. The rents, that's easy to figure out, right? You use a current rent roll. If you want an estimate, if it's vacant or used as a primary, I use Rentometer to have an accurate, an estimate on the rents. But now this is where we really need to focus on the expenses. Maintenance and CapEx. Raise your hand if you know what CapEx is. Good. Can someone give me the definition? It can be dumbed down. I'm not going to quote you on Scrabble dictionary or anything.
Capital expenditures.
Yeah, exactly. That's the abbreviation.
Improve your water heater, whatever.
100%. Okay, so a lot of people, when they are diving into numbers, they only think about the monthly expenses, fixing a light bulb, the disposal needs fixed, right? But they don't keep in mind the roof, the water heater, the major expenses. None of these have an unlimited life. And so whether you're fixing them now or whether you're fixing them in 10 years, you need to start saving reserves to fix those in the future because they're going to happen for sure.
Yeah, what would you like to use insurance for a home to fix your roof? Because it's very
I hate claims. It's even with my car, right? Like I learned this at a young age. I fixed my windshield 3 times in 1 year because of rocks, and now my insurance is insane. So with my mentality of owning these rentals for infinite time, I don't like using my claims.
Also, I would say that if your roof is just old,
Yeah,
it's like the back is angry.
for sure. Yeah, that's a good question though. Okay, so these are the expenses that I would be very cognizant of, and then I'll dive into. I put property management question mark because if you're self-managing, you don't need to throw that in there. If you are, then make sure it's thrown in there. Okay, so now the question is, how do you come up with these numbers, right? I want to have actionable steps so that when you guys go home in the next week, the next 2 weeks, that you have the knowledge to run these numbers on several properties, or else I've wasted my energy up here, right? So make sure you guys are taking action on it because I want to see you guys win too. So for maintenance CapEx, I'm going 10 to 12%, dependent on the property's current location. If it's remodeled, I'm probably closer to 10%, which includes maintenance and CapEx. And I'm pulling these numbers from my previous rentals that I've owned for 6 years. So there might be some old heads that say you're completely off. They have more data than me, so I would trust them. But this is what I use from my mentors as well. 12% if it's older and outdated. Like, keep in mind, what's your name, brother? Nick? Perfect. There's roof, water heater. If I just remodeled this property and fixed those recently, my CapEx in my head is going to be lower than if I'm replacing them in 2 years. So I'll funnel more towards the 10% if it's remodeled.
That's 10% of the value of the property, or?
Percents of rent. Sorry, I should have said that initially. Okay, now property tax, you can get estimates from the county websites. You can also get estimates on the MLS sheets if you're an agent. And then insurance, it's so up in the air right now. I would just get a quote. That's honestly where I would go. It should be pretty easy to get quotes for insurance. And then vacancy, I'd say 3 to 8%. That's kind of a big range. If I'm in Provo, right next to BYU, right next to UVU, right next to University of Utah, I'm probably closer to 3%. If you manage correctly, there should be almost zero vacancy in those areas. So now 8%, maybe you're going to Santa Quin. If you're going to Tooele, maybe 46%. I hate Tooele. So anyways, so that's the vacancy side. 3 to 5% in like prime locations is what I would pencil in for good areas. And then property management, 8 to 10%. Any questions on this part?
I want to know who disagrees in here with his numbers. I mean, it's hard to disagree with these, just say it's based on this. Anybody run their numbers differently than that or disagree at all?
What's up?
No, I'm not taking away from the presentation, but some of my notes, in age, it's my threshold. I don't factor in some of these things because I know I'll make money on the back end in the future, and I can't withstand paying some of this upfront because of the capital I've built. So, but I'm not sure if that's what you're mentioning, but it's just a good.
Well, your criteria is different because you might not include those because of other factors. Right?
Correct, like when I'm buying that property, I'm putting in maybe a new furnace, doing a water heater up front, so that way I have a 5 to 10 year life potentially on it. Now, the numbers, these are good numbers, the conservative, that's good,
Mhm.
yeah. That's the other thing too, when you first run out, you don't know what you don't know, so.
Yeah.
I'm not taking away from your presentation at all. I do these a little differently, but I've also developed a certain set of skills and knowledge based on what I have to do for 20 years.
Yeah, so I would say too, like even if you do replace the water heater, if your plan is to own it for 10 years, would you still say that should incur an expense on a sheet?
Maybe not, in my opinion, not upfront, because already it's part of the acquisition. I built it in. But yeah, should I save for maybe for?
That's all this is. Yeah. Okay.
There's no matter what.
No, I'm not combating. I just like to learn. Like that's beautiful.
I think this is probably illuminating to a lot of people when they don't think. They think they're cash flowing, right? We run into them all the time. Like, oh, the cash flow's $500. For sure it doesn't.
Yeah, 100%.
When you put the stuff in, take all of it into account, the numbers are very different. And obviously, any seller that's selling wants to sell at the highest price possible. They have zero expenses. And the buyer has a lot of expenses.
100%. Yeah. And keep in mind too, like, I think cash flow definition is thrown loosely, which is why I'm reiterating this. Because if you're withdrawing and you're not saving for reserves, then what happens especially for a new investor, then what if you're not saving for that? Like what if you get hit with the $10,000 furnace that needs to be replaced and you have no reserves saved?
You have to fund it one way or the other. So.
Exactly, yeah.
Somebody in the room might be willing to lend to buy an option to participate in that deal.
100%, yeah.
So, do you have a special account just for saving up things that are vacant properties for rental? And then we say, oh, this money, you have a special account just to save that money, you're not touching.
Yeah, so how I do it is I have a separate LLC for all of my properties, and I treat that as a reserve. I heard, and so keep in mind, like if my cash flow, going back here, if my cash flow is $1,500 on this, I have an understanding. I'm gonna put some reserves in there to start because I'm conservative, but like in my head, I can withdraw $1,500 every month, and this will save a bank for me, a reserve. So in 10 years, I'm not stressing about, I'm gonna act like that bank account, I can't withdraw it as long as I have the automatic payments out.
What are your thoughts about HELOCs?
HELOCs, I don't like them. Again, I'm more conservative. The reason being the amount, like being involved in creative finance and tons of deals in the creative finance world, the amount of people I see that are in a tough spot because of a HELOC is more than anything right now. Because it's hard to find a solution if there's a variable rate attached when they've pulled $500,000. Now, there are solutions, I just don't like them. Some of the solutions is you lock their HELOC. Some of the solutions is you pay off the HELOC, but if it's $300,000, that makes it tougher, right? So I'm just showing you on the other side of like bad things when people invest in HELOCs. For my personality, I like to set it and forget it. Keep it like when I acquire a property, I want to stabilize it and not think about it. Less peace of mind. That's why I don't do short term. That's why I don't do like rent by room. Maybe I'm leaving meat on the bones, but I'd rather not think about it. With a HELOC, the same thing in my head is I'm chasing a variable rate. Unless there's a short term fix, then I don't want to chase a variable.
What do you put into reserves for the percentage?
No, I don't have a set stone. Like I do for my, like 6 months of rents is a good like reserve base to start out with, as long as I'm adding these up. But like for my own personal life, I like to stay liquid in general for different things like that. But that same bank account that I'm talking about, I want to treat each property like its own business. And so that reserve amount, the 6 months of rent, I'm attaching to that bank account for that LLC so I can set it and forget it. Good question. Okay, now creating your lead funnel. The different ways to market. I wrote down some of the more popular forms of marketing, especially on the direct to seller right now that I'm seeing. I've done most of these besides PPC. But PPC, pay per click, you're taking, that's the most expensive to least expensive right here, in my opinion. PPC, the lead that you're getting is much, much better. It's people that are clicking saying, I want to buy now, which is great, but it's gonna be more expensive. Direct to mail, the reason it's more expensive is because it's recommended that you do this for a year, that you're hitting the same leads monthly. So then managed cold callers, that's where instead of cold calling yourself, you're paying VAs, you're paying in-house cold call team to make these dials for you. I love managed cold callers a lot more than most of these funnels right now, because as an agent, I can wear two hats. If they want to list and they want top dollar, then the lead is more flexible versus PPC is usually like sell my house fast. And it's like you're throwing a value add cash deal in front of them. And then door knock, you can door knock yourself and then call on market leads. Calling on market leads in today's market has been insane for me. Back in 2020, 2021, there's zero motivation on the market. So you had to spend a lot of money to uncover these leads. Whereas now I've had a lot of success calling on market and negotiating to where they make sense from there. Okay, now on top of those, I'm going to talk about social media for 2 minutes. Social media for me has been absolutely insane. I've been posting consistently for 3 years now on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. I've hated doing it. I still don't love doing it. But again, when my mentors who've been doing this at a high level for a long time preach about it, I try and listen, just put my head down and get after it. So that's why I hire people like Austin to make me look better than I am. Okay, so just a few stats just to show that social media does work. Just in the last 2 years, I made several $100,000 from social media leads specifically. Last year, I had one lead that I did $100,000 with in 45 days on that agent side, right? So that's not a flip. That's 3 different transactions that he was ready to buy for tax purposes at the end of the year from one LinkedIn lead. So social media is massive.
How do you advertise on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so my rules are entertain, educate, call to action. So call to action is like 2% of it. Really entertain and educate are like the 2 biggest things that I would say. And just social media in general, like having a good hook is massive. So if you go to my LinkedIn, it's the first sentence is always, I try to pull in the hook.
Yeah, do you have a cadence on social media? Do you find yourself like 2 reels per day or 1 post per week or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now it's 2 reels a day, 1 on the weekends. You don't have to start there. So don't get overwhelmed by that quantity, just making it happen. Now my cadence is I'll have two days with Austin where we film some in person as a videographer. Then I have my headshot stuff that I do at home that I send to my editor. So it seems like a lot more work than it is, but as you get going, you can streamline it pretty well. Okay, now making offers. This is the last thing that I'll leave with you guys and probably the most important part. It's so simple, but it works like a freaking charm, especially when you're direct with a seller. Even if you're working with an agent specifically, this is my negotiation. On my YouTube, which I have on after this, I literally have live calls talking with people about using these levers. So I call them the 5 levers. When you're in a traditional deal, like a flip or buying a house for a client, there's one term that you can negotiate with between the seller, and that's purchase price. Everything else is left to the bank, and the bank doesn't leave a lot of room for negotiating. So that's why I love seller finance, is because you can negotiate on the 5 terms: purchase price, down payment, interest rate, amortization schedule, balloon payment. So how I relate it, I just made a tacky post today comparing these levers to fantasy football. It's like a draft. It's like, okay, number 1, seller, you can have the purchase price. Number 2, I'm going to pick Tyreek Hill and I'm going to go for interest rate. Number 2 pick, you can take down payment. 4, it's not actually like that, but you're moving and shaking to find a win-win scenario between you and the seller. So that's the game I play. With these 5 levers, you work with the seller to figure it out. Now, typically, with a lot of the deals that I work with, purchase price is most important to the seller and typically down payment. Whereas for me, it's interest rate, balloon, and down payment. So we work around to find a win-win there. Okay, that's all I have for you guys. I appreciate it. If you want more info on like the deep dive into the education side, my Instagram, I do a lot of content on there, and then my YouTube is more in-depth. So thank you, everyone. Oh yeah. Okay. Questions? I know we did them throughout, but
Being a realtor, you thought you knew what the price was, the market tells you differently, and it's really hard to swallow that. Like, I screwed up, I'm supposed to be the expert, you know, I'm 15% off what the market will do. How do you deal with that in this changing market?
that's a great question. Yeah, and the amount of listings that I've lost because I'm like honest with my seller is insane. Like I try and get comps from the last 6 months because of this, 6 months to a year if I need to, but I'm always trying to be conservative. I tell my sellers the worst thing that you can do is be on the market long and have a stale product in today's market because people are going to want to take advantage of it and get a deal. Whereas if you price it right from the beginning, then it usually sells better for higher net. Now, how do you get it accurate? Comps, comps, comps. Same thing in the wholesale world. If you're selling a flip, your comps are going to be your bread and butter. Use data, not emotion. Show them the data, and that's what I'd advise. Any other question? What's up, Blaine?
I was hoping you'd touch on the $180,000 loss. I've heard about that. Could you give us like a 30, 60 second? And then I probably will listen to your podcast. I'd love to know if I can do a deep dive on it.
Yeah, it's on Bigger Pockets, 45 minutes of it, and then I have a YouTube video that's like 10, 15. 30-second rundown is Utah housing is not the only loan product in Utah that's a no-go. And a lot of people throw that out. Avoid Utah housing, avoid Utah housing. Well, there's other entities that are small shops that will track those loans like a hawk. I just so happened to grab one. NeighborWorks is what it's called. These small entities that will track your loans like crazy. Now, another part of that, there's deed restrictions on these to say that you cannot own them if you are an investor. Has to be owner occupant. They can door knock once a year to verify, similar to Utah housing. And so I didn't even know by the time I closed with all these stipulations. And so that's what happened. I didn't have a POA, his signature, to get authorization for a payoff. He was a drunk, couldn't track him down. So, yeah.
Follow up to that there, how did you take title? How was the message?
Yeah, I had title. It was a true sub 2. So we tried to convert to a lease option.
You take it to your name, an entity?
Into an entity, yeah.
An entity?
Yep.
That's probably one of the most red flags that lenders look at when it goes from that person's name into an entity versus some other ways of doing it. So, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, so, and there's land trust. There's a lot of different ways that still don't protect you in this scenario. So I talked to 4 different attorneys, spent tons of money trying to uncover, and I talked to Pace about this for hours. There's a lot of things that, yeah, anyways, we converted to a contract for deed, trying to save it, and it ended up costing me 40, 50 grand more. So people think that these solutions, and it's not, because when I converted to a contract for deed, now I'm taking title back to them. It sells at auction for excess funds. I lose out on 40, 50 grand of excess funds. So.
So this is a little bit of a follow-up question. You have talked about your experiences with losing money. Is it possible for you to still kind of very specific things that you have learned from the time you lost money first?
That's a really good question. I always shoot it back to the shiny object syndrome. Even creative at that time was the shiny object for me. I didn't know it as well as I should have to invest that much in it down, finishing out the basement. Yeah, so shiny object, like Amazon stores, that's the definition of a shiny object, trying to get rich quick. So when I stay in my lane, I've usually been okay. Flips are not my forte. COVID made me look cooler than I was in the flip world, and I'm realizing that I'm not a flipper really. Unless it's easy cosmetic, then I'll touch it. But that's my 2 cents. So.
I'm going to touch on one more.
Sorry, I asked you a question.
You're good.
Where do you pull your list from if you're right now where deals are like being selling?
Yeah, so you can go to a title company. You can go to PropStream to pull like a high equity or own free and clear list. Super easy. And you just skip trace that, and that's your data. So And one thing I'll add too, on top of the 180,000, like if you guys have a good title company that has your back in these creative worlds, that would never have happened. So Christina Moser, GT Title, Shanae Welch at Real Advantage. There's some other amazing title companies that will have your back that I would throw these questions back and forth with. So that would save a lot of heartache.